On a freezing April morning in 2016, the music world didn't just stop, it shattered into a million pieces. Imagine the scene at Paisley Park, that massive, mysterious white compound standing like a fortress in Chanhassen, Minnesota. It was the place where Prince, the Purple One himself, lived, worked, and created an entire universe of sound that redefined pop culture. But on that fateful Thursday, the magic turned into a tragedy that absolutely no one saw coming. When the news broke that Prince had been found unresponsive in an elevator, a collective gasp went around the entire globe. This wasn't just another celebrity passing away. This was the loss of a meticulously private genius who seemed almost immortal. But as the world mourned and the rain seemingly turned purple, a much darker and more complicated story was already beginning to unfold behind those studio walls. You see, Prince was known for being an absolute perfectionist. He controlled every single note, every extravagant costume, and every line of his contracts with an iron fist. So naturally, everyone assumed he had a master plan for his massive empire. But guess what? When the dust finally settled and the lawyers began their search, they found absolutely nothing. No will, no trust, not even a simple handwritten note explaining who should get his iconic guitars or his massive bank accounts. Can you believe it? One of the most careful and protective men in history left behind a massive fortune without a single page of instructions on what to do with it. The immediate panic was real, and it was intense. We're talking about a man who wouldn't even let people take photos of him. Yet he left his entire life's work in a legal limbo that would last for years. Now let's talk about the money, because we aren't just talking about a few $1,000,000 here. We are talking about a staggering valuation of $156 million. But it wasn't just the cash sitting in his bank accounts that made people's eyes pop. It was the real estate, the legendary Paisley Park estate itself, and most importantly, the mythical vault. For decades, rumors had swirled about a climate-controlled room deep inside his home filled with thousands of unreleased songs, music videos, and entire albums that the world had never heard. It was like the holy grail of music, a treasure chest sitting at the bottom of the ocean, and suddenly the map was missing. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a purple gold rush waiting to explode. And oh boy, did people rush in. As soon as the news hit that there was no will, it was like a dinner bell for every opportunist and long-lost relative you could possibly imagine. People started crawling out of the woodwork claiming to be his children, his secret siblings, or even distant cousins he hadn't seen since the 70s. It was absolute madness. Everyone wanted a piece of that $156 million pie. Can you imagine the sheer audacity of it all? But wait. Because it actually gets even crazier than that. This wasn't just a handful of people. Hundreds of claims started pouring into the Minnesota courts, turning a somber moment of mourning into a legal circus that would make a daytime soap opera look like a boring documentary. What followed was a brutal 6-year legal war that would tear families apart and line the pockets of expensive lawyers for over half a decade. We're talking about DNA tests being flown all over the country, massive tax bills from the IRS that would make your head spin, and siblings who probably hadn't spoken in years suddenly being forced to decide the fate of a global icon. It was a mess of epic proportions. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Seriously. Prince's story is the ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when fame, fortune, and family collide without a map. Would you trust your family to handle your legacy if you didn't leave instructions? Prince didn't, and the result was a collision that had no easy exit. Can you imagine dying with hundreds of millions in the bank and absolutely no plan for who gets it? Well, Prince did exactly that. And what followed was a legal nightmare that would make your jaw drop. It's almost ironic, right? The man who fought so hard for artists to own their work ended up leaving his own life's work to be managed by a committee of people he didn't choose. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. The real drama wasn't just about the money, it was about the colorful cast of characters who claimed they were the rightful heirs to the throne. Get ready. Because the fight for the Purple Crown was only just beginning, and things were about to get very, very messy. So who were the people left standing when the gavel finally came down? Out of the hundreds who tried to claim they had Prince's royal blood, only 6 were officially recognized by the court as the rightful heirs. At the center of it all was Tyka Nelson, Prince's only full sister. Tyka was a fascinating figure. a musician who lived in the overwhelming shadow of her brother's superstardom. They had a famously complicated relationship involving years of distance and personal struggles. During those first painful days of mourning, Tika was the public face of the family, greeting the purple-clad crowds outside the gates of Paisley Park. But as the probate process dragged on, it became glaringly obvious that being the closest link didn't grant her total control over the empire. Then you had the 5 half-siblings, Sharon Nelson, Noreen Nelson, John R. Nelson, Alfred Jackson, and Omar Baker. If you are picturing a warm family reunion, you couldn't be further from the truth. Most of these siblings hadn't been a regular part of Prince's life for many years. Some were significantly older, and some were essentially strangers to the complex inner workings of Paisley Park. Can you imagine the tension in the room when these 6 individuals, who weren't exactly a tight-knit group, were told they had to share a $156 million fortune? Suddenly, every decision, from which vault tracks to release to whether or not to sell Prince's custom-made shoes, became a grueling battlefield. $150 million doesn't just buy you luxury, it buys you a lot of reasons to argue. They were a fractured group, forced into a marriage of financial necessity. But before the official 6 could even start fighting with each other, they had to fight off a swarm of pretenders. The drama was something straight out of a tabloid fever dream. Over 700 people came forward claiming they were related to the superstar. One man even filed a formal claim from a federal prison in Colorado, swearing he was Prince's biological long-lost son. Can you believe the audacity? The court had to order DNA tests for dozens of people just to shut down the madness. It was a bizarre scientific reality show where people were begging for a cheek swab to prove they belonged to the Purple Dynasty. In the end, the science didn't lie. Every single secret child claim was debunked, leaving the core siblings to face the next big monster, the cold business of being Prince. While the siblings bickered, the court appointed Comerica Bank to act as the interim managers of the estate. Imagine corporate suits and sterile offices trying to manage the legacy of a man who once changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol just to spite his record label. It was a total culture clash. Comerica was charging millions of dollars in fees just to keep the estate operational, and the heirs were watching their inheritance slowly drain away into the pockets of bankers. Every month the legal battle continued was another month where the fortune was being spent on legal paperwork instead of being preserved for the music. And then the taxman arrived. The IRS looked at the estate and decided it was worth much more than $156 million. This sparked a massive, complex, years-long showdown. How do you put a price tag on a legend? How much is an unreleased demo from 1984 worth if the public hasn't heard it yet? The heirs were caught in a trap. If the value went up, the taxes skyrocketed. It was a high-stakes game of financial poker where the stakes were the very legendary history of modern music. Imagine having to prove your DNA just to inherit your brother's guitar, only to realize the government wants half of it. But what happens when the heirs can't agree on how to spend the money? That's where the real drama started, and things were about to take a corporate turn that no one saw coming on the horizon. The year 2022 finally marked the official end of the grueling legal circus that had kept Prince's legacy in a state of limbo. After 6 long years of bickering, the Minnesota courts approved a final settlement that divided the massive $156 million estate into 2 distinct camps: Prince Legacy LLC and Prince Estate Management. But the biggest bombshell wasn't just the division of assets, it was the arrival of Primary Wave. This massive music publishing company had spent years operating in the shadows, slowly buying up the interests of 3 of the 6 heirs: Alfred Jackson, Omar Baker, and even Prince's full sister Tyka Nelson. Ultimately decided to cash out and sell their stakes to the corporation. For some, the quick payout was the only way to escape the endless cycle of court dates and lawyer meetings. This shift in power changed the game completely. Suddenly, the Purple One's empire wasn't just a family-run business anymore. It was now partially owned by a corporate giant, the exact type of entity Prince had spent his entire career battling against. Talk about a plot twist that would make the legendary artist turn in his grave. The remaining siblings, Sharon, Noreen, and John R. Nelson, chose to keep their interests, creating a permanent tension between family loyalty and corporate strategy. Can you imagine the atmosphere in those boardrooms? You have siblings trying to protect their brother's soul on one side, and a corporation looking for a return on their multi-million-dollar investment on the other. It's a classic power struggle that continues to shape every decision made today. And then, of course, there is the legendary vault. That climate-controlled room at Paisley Park filled with thousands of unreleased tracks is the ultimate treasure chest. Since the final settlement, We've started to see a steady stream of posthumous releases, including the long-awaited Welcome to America album, but the reaction from the fans has been incredibly divided. If you look at the comments on Reddit or Twitter, the community is torn. Some fans are overjoyed to hear anything new from their idol, treating every demo as a gift from the beyond. However, a massive group of diehard supporters is absolutely furious. They argue that Prince was a notorious perfectionist who often refused to release songs he felt weren't ready. To these fans, putting out unfinished work feels like a betrayal of his artistic integrity. They see it as a blatant corporate cash grab designed to monetize his memory rather than honor it. The public outcry doesn't stop with the music. People are genuinely worried that Prince's image is being used for commercials and projects he would have never approved of in a million years. Remember how much he hated the idea of his music being used for advertisements? Now, those decisions are out of his hands. It's a heartbreaking irony that a man who fought so fiercely for artists to own their masters and control their destiny ended up leaving his own work in a legal tug of war. What happens to Paisley Park now? While it remains a museum for now, the future feels uncertain. Will it stay a sanctuary for his fans, or will it eventually be sold off to the highest bidder? In the end, Prince's greatest mistake might have been his legendary silence on his final wishes. His life was a masterclass in control and mystery, but his death became a public free-for-all. What do you think? Is the estate actually doing him justice by sharing his hidden gems with the world? Or is this just one big corporate heist? Should the vault have been burned to the ground like some suggest? Or are we lucky to hear the music he kept secret? Let us know in the comments below, because the battle for the Purple Crown might be legally settled, but the debate over his legacy is just getting started. Is the Purple Spark fighting to stay alive in a world of corporate balance sheets? Or has the music already died for good?